October 9th, 11:27 a.m. Boise Appliance Center. I heard a sentence I will never forget. Your son has already confirmed payment on your behalf. The card was charged. The document is signed. The salesman slid a warm receipt into my hand. $25,000 printed in bold, my name beneath it, and a shaky signature that wasn't mine. Under approved by it read, Brian Harper, immediate family authorization. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mix-up. It was a decision someone made about my life without me. Madison leaned in, her perfume sharp and sugary, her whisper colder than the automatic doors behind us. You're old anyway, Evelyn. We need these things more than you do. I stood there holding that paper while the salesman waited for my confirmation, politely pretending not to watch me unravel. And one question slid under my ribs like a blade. How could they do this to me? If you want to hear the full story, subscribe to the channel. And now, let me tell you how everything began. My name is Evelyn Harper. I am 70 years old, a widow, a seamstress, and the keeper of a house on the edge of Boise. The paint is peeling on the porch rail, the maple tree out front leans like an old friend, and the hallway still smells faintly of my late husband's aftershave when the heat kicks on. I have lived here for 38 years. Every room holds a version of me that worked, loved, lost, and kept going. My life was never glamorous, but it was honest. I stitched hems and wedding dresses and work uniforms until my fingertips were thick with tiny scars. I ironed late into the night while the hum of the fridge kept me company, and the only clock that mattered was the one glowing on the microwave. When my husband Tom got sick, I learned to read medical bills and insurance letters as fluently as I read pattern sheets. When he died, I buried him with one hand and balanced the checkbook with the other. Poverty pressed against us more than once, like a rude guest that refused to leave. There were winters when the thermostat stayed at 60, and I sewed extra orders just to keep the lights on. I never told Brian how many times I skipped meat so he could have seconds. His school pictures hung in mismatched frames along the hallway. Each one a year I managed to keep us afloat. He never went to bed hungry. That was my quiet victory. I am not foolish. I am not fragile. The world has tried to tell me what I am many times, too old, too small, too soft, but I know better. A woman who has stood in line at 3 different banks to argue over a $28 fee is not weak. A woman who has read every word of every mortgage adjustment at the kitchen table does not simply forget her PIN. My memory may drop a name now and then, but it never drops a due date. Brian is my only child. He was born in June, on a morning that smelled of hospital disinfectant and orange juice. I remember the feel of his tiny hand curled around my finger more clearly than I remember my own 25th birthday. I worked nights so he could have his soccer cleats, his college application fees, his first dented car. I did not spoil him, but I did protect him, sometimes more than I should have. Madison came later, all bright lipstick and fast talk. She worked in marketing, she said, and didn't really get sewing, but she liked the little dresses I had hanging in the front room. She called me Eve after the second visit, as if we had agreed to it. I watched the way she straightened Brian's collar and scrolled through her phone at the same time. Smart, efficient, restless. I did not dislike her. I just never fully relaxed around her. 6 months before that day at the appliance store, they arrived on my porch with 2 suitcases, a plastic laundry basket, and faces that looked strangely hopeful for people in supposed distress. It was a Sunday. The neighbor's sprinkler clicked on and off while Brian explained how the market turned, and the landlord raised the rent out of nowhere. Madison dabbed at her eyes with a sleeve that didn't have any tears on it. We just need a little time, Mom, Brian said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. We'll help you around the house. It'll be good for all of us. You shouldn't be alone so much. I remember the weight of my house keys in my pocket as he spoke. For years, I had carried them on the same faded blue lanyard Tom brought home from a hardware store conference. The metal felt suddenly heavier. I could have said no. I could have suggested a cheap apartment across town, or a room to rent from someone their own age. Instead, I stepped aside and opened the door. I told myself that I was being practical. The stairs were getting harder on my knees. The leaves were too much for one person in the fall. Having another pair of hands around the place I thought might not be the worst thing. Besides, Brian was my son. I had changed his diapers. Surely I could trust him to change a light bulb. They moved in quickly, as if they had expected my yes. Madison's makeup spread across the bathroom counter by that evening, little compacts and brushes nudging aside my jar of cold cream. Brian parked his car in the driveway like it had always been there. He hugged me before bed, smelling faintly of the same cologne Tom used to wear, and I let that scent soothe me. Looking back now, I can see the outline of their intentions the way a seamstress sees the grain of a fabric in good light. The timing, the urgency, the way they asked about square footage and property taxes more than they asked about my blood pressure. But at the time, I saw only my child on my porch asking to come home. If I had listened more to the small tightening in my chest than to the warm echo of his mom, perhaps none of this would have happened. But this is the truth. Love can blur numbers and signatures and warning signs. I was not blind. I was simply trying, as I had always done, to believe the best of the boy I raised. The first crack didn't sound like a crack at all. It came disguised as a joke, one of those remarks people make lightly, but with a weight that lingers long after the laugh fades. It was a Tuesday evening, early spring, the kind where the light through my kitchen window turns everything a pale gold. I was stirring a pot of lentil soup, the kind Tom used to ask for when he'd had a long day. Madison sat at the table scrolling through her phone, tapping her nails in a rhythm that had no particular pattern. Brian had just finished fixing a loose cabinet hinge for me. He wiped his hands on a towel and said almost proudly, "There you go, Mom. See, it's good we're here." Madison didn't look up from her screen. She just smirked and said, "Good thing your mom never remarried. I mean, imagine splitting this house one more way. At least this way someday it'll be ours." She said it with a light laugh, as if it didn't matter at all. I remember my spoon pausing mid-stir. A small motion, barely noticeable, but it felt like something in me stilled. Brian chuckled softly, almost embarrassed. "Madison," he said under his breath, "come on." She shrugged. "What?" "I'm just being realistic." Realistic. That word hung in the air like a draft. I forced a polite laugh. Years of surviving uncomfortable rooms had trained my body to smile on command. "Well," I said, "I suppose none of us know what the future holds." My voice was steady. Even then, my control was something I relied on like a sturdy railing. But something inside me shifted. After dinner, I carried the bowls to the sink, the ceramic warm against my palms. I could hear them whispering in the living room, their murmurs slipping through the doorway like thin smoke. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I simply have good ears even at 70. I heard Madison's voice, low and sharp. "You need to stop correcting me in front of her. She'll think I'm being rude." Brian replied, "Because you are rude sometimes." "Well," she snapped softly, "so what? She's not going to be around forever." Those words didn't hurt like a wound. They landed more like a forecast, cold, factual, unsettling. I stood at the sink and washed each bowl slowly, feeling the warm water slip over my fingers. I stared at the reflection in the window, my face faint in the glass, the maple tree behind me almost bare. I thought of the years I spent building a life in that kitchen, the thousands of meals cooked, the birthdays sung, the arguments settled with quiet apologies. It struck me that my home, once my refuge, was beginning to echo with a tone that did not belong to me. Later that evening, I sat in my armchair with a cup of chamomile tea, the steam fogging my glasses for a moment. Across the room, Madison laughed at something on her phone, some video or message I wasn't meant to see. Brian sat next to her, his leg bouncing, a tell he'd had since childhood whenever he felt pressured. I watched them without judgment but with a growing awareness. They weren't settling in, they were settling over. Occupying. Testing the edges of what they could say, what they could touch, what they could claim. Madison caught my gaze once and offered a smile just a touch too polished. "Do you want us to pick up anything for you tomorrow?" she asked sweetly. "Maybe some of that herbal stuff you like?" I nodded. That would be nice. Inside, I wondered why the question felt like an inspection. That night, when I went to my bedroom, I passed by the door to the guest room they had taken over. It was half open. I saw a stack of my envelopes, utility bills, bank statements, on the dresser beside Madison's makeup bag. I told myself she must have been tidying, that she moved them without thinking. I told myself many things, but the first crack had already formed. A house settles. Wood shifts. Floors creak. Lives evolve. But this was different. This was the quiet beginning of something I couldn't yet name, but could feel growing in the spaces between us. And I should have listened more closely to that first sound. It did not happen all at once. It spread slowly, like a stain on a tablecloth that you only notice once it has already reached the edges. First, it was little things easy to excuse. A door left open, a drawer not quite closed, a question that sounded like concern but settled in my chest like doubt. They began walking through my home with a kind of careless confidence. Brian would open the fridge, stare inside and say, "We should really upgrade this, Mom. These old models eat electricity." Madison would run her fingers along the countertops and lift an eyebrow, as if the house itself had let her down by aging at the same pace I had. One afternoon I came back from the post office and found Madison in my bedroom. She had both closet doors open, my blouses shifted to one side. "I was just looking for that face cream you said you liked," she announced without turning around. My hands tightened around the bundle of mail I was carrying. "The bathroom cabinet," I answered quietly. "Top shelf." She laughed, airy, dismissive. "Oh right. I got distracted. You have so much stuff, Eve. You really should let us help you organize." Organize. Another practical word that felt like a key in the wrong lock. I started noticing the papers on my desk changing places. My checkbook no longer sat exactly parallel to the edge. My bank statements were stacked in a different order. Once, a sticky note I kept inside the front page of my account ledger appeared 2 pages back, as though someone had flipped through, then tried to put it back and missed. Brian, who had once joked that he would rather do anything than paperwork, suddenly took an interest in my bills. "Here, Mom, let me look at that," he would say when the mail arrived. "These companies try to trick older customers all the time. I'll explain it to you." He spoke slowly, carefully, like a teacher addressing a distracted student. First I let him. It seemed ungrateful not to. But there was an odd disconnect between his tone and my own understanding. I could see the numbers. I could follow the charges. Yet each time he helped, something subtle shifted. A due date circled in red, an automatic payment suggested, a form pulled aside. "You don't have to worry about all this," he reassured me one evening, his pen tapping against the table. "You've handled everything alone for so long. Just relax. Let me protect you from this boring stuff." Protect me. At night, when the house quieted and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside, I would sit at the kitchen table with my mug of chamomile and restack the papers the way I liked them. Account statements, insurance notices, property tax reminders. The familiar weight of responsibility soothed me. Numbers have been my silent companions for decades. They never fussed. They never criticized. They simply added up. But now, even they seemed to be shifting alliances. Madison started asking questions that had nothing to do with my well-being and everything to do with my assets. "Do you still have a mortgage?" she asked one Sunday, as if in casual conversation. "What's the interest rate? That's probably terrible by now." Another day, as we folded laundry together, she asked, "So what happens to the house in your will? Have you ever thought about simplifying things, for the future?" "The future will wait its turn," I replied, folding one of my own blouses with deliberate care. "For now I am still here." She smiled at that, but there was a flicker in her eyes, quick and assessing. It was not that they never asked how I felt. They did, but the question slid in sideways, attached to something else. "How are you sleeping, Mom?" Brian asked, while his phone screen glowed with a banking app reflection in his glasses. "You've seemed more forgetful lately. Remember when you misplaced your keys last week?" I remembered. I had left them by the potted fern instead of on the hook. One mistake in 30 years. Yet suddenly it was evidence. I started to feel watched in my own home, as if every small error was being quietly recorded. A burnt piece of toast. A missed call. A moment searching for the right word. Each one landed in a little invisible file labeled proof. The house responded to their presence in its own way. The floorboard outside their room creaked louder, complaining. The old clock in the hallway, which had ticked calmly for years, began to run a minute fast, as if hurrying me toward something I was not ready to meet. I took refuge in small routines, watering my plants at the same time each morning, wiping down the kitchen table after dinner, smoothing the quilt on my bed before turning off the light. On the surface, everything looked normal. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just 3 adults sharing a space. But beneath that calm, I could feel a pressure growing, as steady as the hallway clock I suddenly heard in every room. Again. It all came to a head on that October morning at the Boise Appliance Center. The air inside was too cold, the kind of manufactured chill that makes chrome shine and people buy things they don't need. I had come along because Brian said they wanted my expert eye on a new refrigerator. I still don't know whether he meant that as a joke. Madison walked ahead of us in her heeled boots, the click of them echoing on the polished floor. She moved from display to display, opening doors, peering inside, wrinkling her nose at anything that wasn't top of the line. I drifted a few steps behind, trailing my fingers along the edges of the units, feeling the smooth metal under my hand like the cool side of a pillow. "This one," Madison announced finally, stopping in front of a massive stainless steel model with a glowing screen on the door. "Look, it even has cameras inside. And it connects to an app. We need this, Brian." "We don't need cameras in a refrigerator," I said gently. "My old one is still working." Madison laughed. "Your old one is prehistoric, Evelyn. Besides, think of it as an upgrade for all of us. We're living here now, remember?" Brian put an arm around her shoulders and looked at the price tag. I watched his face carefully. $25,000. For a refrigerator and matching appliances. The number sat on the little white card like it belonged in another world. "That's a lot of money," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not comfortable with that." Brian turned toward me, hands in his pockets. "Relax, Mom. We've talked about this. The house needs updating if you ever want to sell it or do a reverse mortgage. Think of it as an investment." The salesman appeared then, smiling the way salesmen do when they sense momentum. His name tag read Kyle, and he smelled faintly of laundry detergent and coffee. "Great choice," he said. "Are we putting this on your account today, Mrs. Harper?" Before I could answer, Brian stepped a little closer to him. "She always forgets her PIN," he said lightly. "So I'll handle everything. We already talked to the bank about family authorization." I frowned. "We did not," I said. "Brian, I never." Madison's fingers pressed into my elbow. "Evelyn, you're overthinking again," she murmured, low enough that only I could hear. "We already sorted the details. You said you trusted us, remember?" The salesman watched our little triangle of tension with professional politeness. Brian took my wallet from the top of my handbag, so casually it almost looked helpful. He slid out my card and my ID while I stood there, rooted to the glossy floor. "Sir, I'll just need her to confirm on the keypad," the salesman said. "She can't always manage that," Brian replied smoothly. "She has some age-related memory issues. The bank knows. There should be a note." Age-related memory issues. The words hit me harder than the numbers on the price tag. I felt the flush rise in my throat, the way it used to when someone spoke over me in a meeting years ago. I opened my mouth to protest, but Madison tightened her grip. "Don't make a scene," she breathed. "It's embarrassing when you get confused." Confused. That was their story. The salesman tapped at his tablet, eyes flicking between the screen and Brian. "Yes, I see here," he said slowly. "Immediate family authorization on file. Brian Harper is approved to confirm on your behalf, Mrs. Harper." I watched him hand Brian a stylus. My son signed on the little glowing rectangle with a flourish that looked nothing like my careful looping script. The machine chirped. A receipt began to print. Somewhere above us, soft music played. Some song from 20 years ago turned into background noise. "Here you go, ma'am," the salesman said, offering me the receipt. I took it. The paper was warm, as if it carried a fever. My eyes moved to the total, then to my own name printed in black. Underneath, a signature that was not mine. And under that, a line that made my stomach drop. Approved by Brian Harper. Immediate family authorization. I felt suddenly separate from my own life, like I was watching an older woman being handled, managed, spoken for. That woman had my cardigan, my shoes, my name. "Everything's all set," Brian said briskly. "They'll deliver next week. This is going to be so much better for everyone." Everyone. My card hadn't declined. It had been frozen deliberately. Someone had gone to the bank, said words about me I never heard. and arranged the world so that I could be bypassed with a signature and a smile. That someone was my son. I thought of my card being declined at the pharmacy for a small prescription. The cashier had blamed the system and I had blamed my age. Now I saw the truth. The problem was not the machine. It was the story my son told about me when I wasn't there to answer. I folded the receipt once, then again, the paper stiff between my fingers. My voice when it came was even. "All right," I said. "I see." I did not shout at the store. I did not grab the receipt or demand that the salesman tear it up. I simply folded the paper and slipped it into my purse, right next to the small lavender sachet I kept there. The scent calmed me enough to keep my face smooth. On the drive home, Madison talked about finishes and colors as if nothing unusual had happened. "Maybe we should repaint the kitchen too," she said. "If we modernize everything, it'll raise the property value. It's really the smartest move." Brian drove with one hand on the wheel, the other tapping his phone at red lights, answering messages I could not see. "It's handled, Mom," he said once, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "You don't have to stress about money anymore. I've taken a lot off your plate." I watched the familiar streets pass by. The grocery store where I used coupons for years, the park where Brian scraped his knees learning to ride a bike, the small brick bank where I had opened my first account. Each landmark looked the same, but my understanding of my place among them had shifted. Somewhere inside that bank, my name had been quietly rearranged. When we pulled into the driveway, I let them go in ahead of me. I stood for a moment on the front walk, keys in my hand, feeling the October air on my face. The maple tree in the yard shed another dry leaf at my feet, a small soundless surrender. Inside, Madison went straight to her laptop. Brian disappeared into the guest room with his phone pressed to his ear. I walked to the kitchen, set my handbag on the table, and took out the receipt. The numbers stared back, orderly and unbothered. $25,000. Approved. My hands did not shake. Instead, a kind of quiet settled over me, heavy but clarifying, like the thick silence after a storm. I looked around my own kitchen, the scuffed cabinets Tom installed, the old refrigerator humming dutifully in the corner, the magnet shaped like a strawberry holding up a faded recipe card. These things had been my companions, not my possessions to flaunt. I realized with a sharp, almost physical clarity that my son no longer saw this house as my shelter. To him it had become an asset, a tool, a guarantee. And I, his mother, who had once been his whole world, had been carefully repositioned as an obstacle to be worked around. That was the true betrayal. I sat down, the chair legs scraping softly against the tile. For the first time in months, I allowed my thoughts to complete their sentences. I replayed little moments I had brushed aside. The shifted papers, the questions about my will, the way Brian had corrected me in front of the pharmacist when I hesitated over a dosage. They had not come to help me. They had come to harvest what I had built. I thought of all the times I had stood alone in this kitchen, paying bills with a calculator and a cup of weak coffee, deciding which expense could wait and which could not. I remembered the satisfaction of keeping us afloat when no one else was coming. I was not helpless then. I was not helpless now. I reached for my old wooden box on the top shelf of the pantry, the one labeled simply papers in Tom's careful handwriting. I carried it to the table, feeling the familiar weight in my arms. For years it had sat open, an easy archive of our life together. This time I did something I had never done before. I placed the appliance receipt on top of the pile, smoothed it flat, and then locked the box. The small click of the lock sounded louder than Madison's laughter from the next room, louder than Brian's muffled voice through the wall. It was the sound of a line being drawn. "Evelyn," I told myself silently, "either you save yourself now or you will watch them spend you." I sat there for a long time, my hand resting on the smooth wooden lid, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator and the ticking of the hallway clock. For the first time in a very long time, I chose to listen not to my fear of losing my son, but to my knowledge of who I had always been. A woman who survives. I straightened my back and let my shoulders drop, the way I did after finishing a difficult scene. There was work to do now and I knew how to work. I would go to the bank. I would ask for Mr. Collins, the head of security who had once helped me dispute a fraudulent charge. I would move what needed moving, protect what needed protecting. They had written a story about me without my consent, confused, declining, dependent. I could not stop them from telling it to strangers, but I could decide whether it would be true. That night, as I lay in bed, the house felt different. Not smaller, not colder, just awake. The hallway clock ticked steadily. In the guest room, Brian's phone buzzed with messages. Madison's laugh rose and fell faintly through the wall. I stared at the ceiling and whispered into the dark. Tomorrow we begin again. For the first time since they moved in, I fell asleep with a plan, not a worry. The next morning, I did not go back to the appliance store to argue over metal and glass. I went somewhere far more important. The small brick bank on Maple Avenue, the one that still smelled faintly of toner and floor polish. I arrived at 9:02 a.m. The time stamped on the little digital clock above the entrance. "Good morning, Mrs. Harper," the teller Susan said. She had seen me for years depositing small checks, asking precise questions. "How can we help you today?" "I need to speak with Mr. Collins," I replied. "The head of security." Something in my tone must have reached her. She didn't ask why. She picked up the phone. Mr. Collins was a solid man in his 50s with kind eyes and a memory for details. He had once helped me dispute a $43 charge from a gas station I'd never visited. When he appeared at the doorway of his office and saw my face, his expression shifted from professional to concerned. "Evelyn," he said, "come in. What's happened?" I sat down in the chair opposite his desk, smoothed my skirt, and placed the folded receipt on the wood between us. "I need to know," I said calmly, "exactly what has been done to my accounts in my name." He read the receipt carefully. I watched his eyes pause on the phrase, "age-related memory decline." His jaw tightened. "Did you authorize this family authorization form?" he asked. "No," I answered. "I did not sign anything granting my son control over my finances, and I did not forget my PIN." He nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then let's look." For the next 40 minutes we examined my accounts together. He turned the computer screen slightly toward me so I could see every line. There it was, a note added 3 months earlier, stating that due to cognitive concerns, my son Brian Harper could approve transactions on my behalf. "Who added that?" I asked. "According to this, your son came in with you," Mr. Collins said carefully. "The form has both your signatures." I felt that now familiar split, as if there were two of me, the woman who knew she had never signed such a thing, and the woman whose name and shaky imitation now sat in their system. "I was never here for that," I said. He studied me for a moment, then exhaled. "All right, Evelyn. Here is what we are going to do." In that sentence he did something important. He put me back in the center of my own story. We opened a new savings account in my name alone, invisible on the online dashboard unless accessed with a separate password only I knew. We transferred my primary funds there, leaving just enough in the original account to look plausible. $600. Enough to tempt, not enough to ruin me if it vanished. "We'll put an alert on any withdrawals or changes requested under Brian Harper's name," Mr. Collins said, typing steadily. "You'll receive a call directly. No one will freeze your card or move your money without your spoken consent. Do you understand?" "Yes," I said. My voice sounded different to my own ears, firmer, as if it had grown a spine. He printed new documents, each page crisp and substantial. "Read these," he said, sliding them toward me. "Take your time. If there's anything you don't understand, ask me." I read every line. Old habits. When I was satisfied, I signed in my own careful hand, each letter of my name clear and steady. This time the signature matched the woman signing. When we finished, he sat back. "One more thing," he said. "I'm flagging your profile for in-person verification. If anyone ever claims you're incapacitated, we will call you directly and require a doctor's statement. You are not invisible here, Evelyn." Invisible. That was what I had been feeling in my own home. As I walked out of the bank, my handbag felt lighter, though the same old wooden box of documents waited for me at home. The October sun hit the pavement, sharp and bright. I paused on the sidewalk and looked at the time on my phone. 10:18 a.m. In just over an hour, I had shifted the ground beneath my son's plans. I was no longer the woman in the background of his financial story. I was once again the author of my own. And somewhere inside the quiet of that bank, a trap had been set, Not out of cruelty, but out of necessary truth. On the bus ride home, I sat by the window and watched the city move past in small scenes. A mother adjusting her child's backpack. A man sweeping leaves from a storefront. None of them knew that a 70-year-old woman in a gray cardigan had quietly rewritten the ending to a story someone else had started for her that cool morning. I rested my hand on the bank folder in my lap, feeling the raised logo through the thin cardboard. These were not weapons in any dramatic sense. They were only papers, passwords, quiet protections. Yet to me they felt like armor. I had not raised my voice or hurled accusations. I had simply chosen to trust my own judgment over my son's version of who I was. The call came the very next morning, sooner than even I expected. I was standing at the kitchen counter slicing an apple, the old refrigerator humming faithfully behind me, when my phone vibrated. The caller ID read, Maple Avenue Bank. I wiped my hands on a towel and answered. Mrs. Harper? A formal voice asked. This is Angela from Account Security. We're calling because someone is attempting to withdraw $600 from your checking account. The individual claims you are currently hospitalized after a fall and have authorized him to handle your affairs. A fall. Hospitalized. The lie held a casual cruelty, as if spoken by someone who believed such a fate for me was not only plausible, but convenient. Who is attempting the withdrawal? I asked, though I already knew. Your son, Brian Harper. I closed my eyes for a moment. I had prepared myself for this, yet hearing it aloud pressed something sharp beneath my ribs. Thank you, I said quietly. Please deny the withdrawal. I am at home. I am perfectly well. And I have not authorized him to act on my behalf. Yes, Mrs. Harper. Security is handling it. I ended the call and let the room settle around me. The maple tree outside tapped lightly against the window. From down the hallway, I heard the faint buzz of Brian's phone, then his hurried footsteps as he rushed out of the guest room. He didn't know I had heard everything. I moved to the dining room doorway, standing just out of sight. Brian's voice rose, tense and pleading. No, there must be some mistake. My mother is in the hospital. They called me this morning. You can't just, no, listen. A pause. Then louder. What do you mean she denied it? She can't. She doesn't even look. I'll bring paperwork. I'll. Silence. A sharp exhale. A muttered curse. Then the thud of his phone hitting the table. Madison appeared from the hallway. What happened? Brian ran a hand through his hair, panic turning his voice brittle. The bank refused. They said she personally denied the withdrawal. Madison blinked, confused. But she wasn't supposed to be reachable. Something in her tone, sharp, demanding, as though she had suffered a betrayal, made me step back so she wouldn't see me. My heart beat in slow, deliberate thuds. Brian's voice cracked. They flagged me. They said I'm not on the account anymore. I don't know how. I swear yesterday everything was fine. Madison's expression changed. Gone was the polished sweetness, the gentle condescension. What replaced it was raw irritation. So you messed it up, she snapped. You told me this would work. You told me she'd never notice anything. She wasn't supposed to. Brian shot back. The authorization was set. I don't know how she. Madison cut him off. Unbelievable. I should have known you'd screw this up. We had one plan. One. And you couldn't even control your own mother for 24 hours. He flinched the same way he used to as a child when someone scolded him unfairly. Madison, don't. Oh, save it, she spat. I'm done. I'm not getting dragged down with you. I'm not losing my credit because you can't handle basic things. Where are you going? Away from this, she said, gesturing broadly at the home she had treated like her own. Away from you. She stormed down the hallway, grabbed her suitcase, still half-packed from their arrival months ago, and slammed the front door behind her. The house shuddered with the force of it. Brian stood alone in the living room, hands limp at his sides. He looked smaller than he had in years, like a boy who had wandered somewhere he did not understand. He sank onto the couch and covered his face with both hands. For a moment I only watched him unseen. My son. My only child. The boy I had raised on thrift store uniforms and hopeful promises. He had chosen greed over trust. He had chosen convenience over dignity. And now the consequences, his own doing, had begun to gather around him like cold weather. At last I stepped into view. He lifted his head. His eyes were red. "Mom, please," he whispered, voice cracking. "Please talk to me. I don't know what I thought." I sat down across from him, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "Brian," I said softly, "I heard the bank call." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I was under pressure. Madison kept, and the bills, I made mistakes." Mistakes. A small word for a large breach. I let the silence rest between us. Then I said in the calmest voice I had, "I love you, but I choose myself. If I ever want to talk, I will call you." He stared at me, stunned. Then he nodded, a defeated, trembling nod. He gathered his things quietly and left through the same door his wife had slammed minutes earlier. As it closed behind him, the house exhaled. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by the artifacts of my years, framed photographs, old quilts, familiar furniture, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Safety. The trap had sprung, not because I wished it, but because truth has a way of revealing itself when pretenses fall away. And now finally I had room to breathe. When the door closed behind Brian, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of small, steady sounds I had been too tense to notice for months. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the hallway clock, the faint rush of cars passing on the street outside. My house felt as if it had taken a long, deep breath. I stood in the center of the living room, my hands resting lightly on the back of Tom's old armchair. The cushions had molded to my shape over the years, but for a while now I had been sharing the room with other people's moods, other people's noise. Without them, the space seemed to return to its natural size. I walked slowly from room to room, as if reintroducing myself to each one. In the guest room, no, I corrected myself, my extra room again. The bed was unmade, the imprint of their brief stay still visible in the rumpled sheets. A half-empty bottle of perfume sat on the dresser. I opened the window and let the cool October air sweep through, carrying away the last trace of Madison's scent. I stripped the bed, lifting each corner of the mattress with care. As I folded the sheets into the laundry basket, I felt no triumph, only a kind of sober relief. This was not about winning. This was about righting something that had tilted too far. In the closet, a wire hanger had been bent into an uneven shape. I straightened it with my hands, then hung it back in line with the others. That small act felt like a quiet declaration, order restored by my own touch. Later, in the kitchen, I put on a fresh pot of tea. I used my favorite mug, the chipped one with the faded blue flowers, the same mug I had held on the morning I decided to go to the bank. The ceramic warmed my palms. I stood at the table where the wooden box of documents rested, locked, my life stacked in careful layers inside. I did not open it. For now, it was enough to know that everything important was where it should be. My will unchanged, my accounts secure, my decisions my own. Over the next few days, I moved through my routine slowly, testing the edges of this new quiet. I swept the floors. I took out the trash. I sat on the porch and watched the neighborhood children ride their bicycles in unsteady circles. The maple tree dropped more leaves, scattering them across the yard like paper reminders that seasons change whether we are ready or not. One afternoon, I carried a folding table into the extra room and set it up by the window. On it I placed my sewing machine, the same sturdy model that had seen me through years of late-night work. Beside it I laid out my threads in neat rows, each spool a familiar color from some past project. The room, once crowded with borrowed things, now held only what belonged to me. I added a small easel in the corner, a set of watercolors I had bought months ago and never opened. The brushes felt light in my hand, their bristles clean and full of possibility. I was 70 years old, and yet there were still skills I had not tried, pictures I had not painted. The first time I dipped a brush into the paint and brought it to paper, my hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the unfamiliar pleasure of doing something with no purpose except my own enjoyment. I painted the maple tree outside my window, its branches bare, its trunk steady. When I finished, the picture was simple, imperfect, but honest. "This is mine," I said softly to the empty room. In the evenings, I no longer listened for the sound of Brian's car in the driveway or Madison's steps in the hallway. Instead, I put on the old radio station Tom used to like and let the music fill the spaces they had occupied with tension. I cooked smaller meals, just enough for one, and ate them at the kitchen table without rushing. There were moments of grief, of course. Grief not only for the son I had lost in this new version of him, but for the illusion I had cherished, that love alone would protect me from such choices. I allowed myself to feel that grief fully, then set it gently beside the knowledge that I had acted rightly, both for myself and in a way he might never admit for him. Time did not erase what had happened, but it did soften the edges. Days became weeks. The bank stopped calling. The new refrigerator was delivered and installed by men who were polite and efficient. I paid the remaining balance on my own schedule, from my secure account, and kept the receipt in my wooden box with the others. Little by little, my home returned to its natural rhythm, and so did I. On Thursdays I started going to a watercolor class at the community center. I walked in with my brushes wrapped in a dish towel and sat in the back row. No one there knew me as Brian's mother or as a woman to be managed. I was simply Evelyn, learning how blue paint spreads through water and makes its own quiet choices. On the walk home, I caught myself planning the next painting instead of replaying old arguments in my head, softly so. In the quiet that followed those weeks, something inside me settled, like dust finally choosing where to land. My home no longer felt like a place I needed to defend. It felt once again like a place that held me gently. Each morning I opened the curtains, let the light spill across the floor, and breathed without bracing for someone else's footsteps. One afternoon, as I sat at my sewing table repairing a loose hem, I realized how still my hands were. For months they had trembled, not from age, but from tension I could never name aloud. Now they moved with familiar certainty, the thread slipping through fabric the way truth eventually slips through lies. Quietly, inevitably. People think the hardest part of betrayal is the action itself. It isn't. The hardest part is accepting that you were never imagining the shift beneath your feet. That the unease was real. That your instincts, however soft-spoken, were never wrong. I am not angry anymore. Anger burns too quickly. What I feel now is something steadier. A sense of rightness of having stepped back into my own life. I have boundaries where silence used to be. I have peace where doubt once lived. And I have myself. Sometimes life takes away the people you believed would walk beside you forever. But sometimes in their leaving they return someone else to you, the woman you were always meant to be. Strong, capable, clear-eyed, whole. Love can be unconditional, but trust should never be. If this touched a nerve, you belong here. Subscribe to hear truths where silence becomes strength.